welcome to another author talk. Today we have Wayne Dowdy, who's the author of Pro Wrestling in Memphis, A History. Wayne, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing okay.
Good.
Just admiring your blue sky. So Wayne is the senior manager of the Memphis Public Library's History Department. He holds a master's degree in history from the University of Arkansas, is a contributing writer for Best Times magazine, and is an Eagle Scout. He's the author of 8 other books, including A Brief History of Memphis, Enslavement in Memphis, and On This Day in Memphis History, which was awarded a Certificate of Merit by the Tennessee Historical Commission. We're talking about your newest book, Pro
Yeah.
Wrestling in Memphis.
Mhm.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about that book?
Yeah, uh it's a full history starting when the very first sort of wrestling matches started occurring in Memphis in the 1890s through the 1920s, when wrestling became a very, very popular sport all across the United States. And Memphis emerged as this very important wrestling center where all the major names would come to Memphis and wrestle. Memphis even had a national champion, a guy named Jim Londos, who made his Memphis was his base. He wasn't from here, but he became associated with the city through World War II, and then the most popular aspect of Memphis wrestling occurred after World War II, 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. So, what I wanted to do was try and put it in some context to understand how it evolved, not just looking at uh, all of the wild antics that took place, and there are a lot of those, but to try to understand first how it started, and secondly, trying to understand why it emerged in Memphis. What was it about the city that embraced this sport? And what I think, what I've concluded is that really and truly the city influenced the sport far more than it influenced Memphis, because all of the violence that you see in professional wrestling is very much in keeping with much of the culture of this city, but also that sense of entertainment and uh, seeing what having faith in that this is all true, and all of these things are wrapped up in how the city is, and ultimately, Memphis's style of wrestling, with its elaborate storylines, feuds, a lot of violence, a lot of that sort of thing, really has a strong influence on what professional wrestling is like today. In many ways, the WWE is culturally an outgrowth of what was happening in Memphis much, much earlier.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that? So was Memphis kind of a violent city and that's how we got to wrestling?
Yes, I mean, historically, Memphis has always been sort of a frontier town. I mean, when the city was founded in 1819, we were on the frontier of the United States, right on the Mississippi River, and the river itself was a violent place. The men who worked on the river were rough and tumble people who simply wanted their freedom and didn't want to be bothered with anything. And so the first settlers of Memphis were rivermen. And so they liked to live their life the way they wanted to live it. And they weren't all that interested in government. They weren't interested in law enforcement. They just wanted to be free. And so that really was a culture that existed when the city was founded. And then a second factor is that the city never developed a strong natural sort of aristocracy. The men who actually owned the property, who and sold it, sold lots to individuals whom they're called the proprietors in Memphis. They never lived here. One of the proprietors, his son, lived here and became the city's first mayor, but and so there wasn't a lot of control from above in Memphis. Most of what happens in this city, and this is true even today, is comes from the grassroots. Memphis is a bottom up town, and so wrestling is a part of that. No one sat down and said, "Oh, I've got this wonderful formula for creating this entertainment." It evolved out of the grassroots of the people, and Memphis historically has had a lot of crime, like a lot of cities, but it's unique in that um, it's very the culture of the frontier really, I think, is an important aspect of the history. I mean, even today, if you drive down the streets of Memphis, you discover that traffic laws are really just guidelines in Memphis, and that's not good, but it shows us just the sort of um, uh, freedom loving, live and let live sort of aspect of the city.
Interesting. So you've written a few books about Memphis. What made
Yeah.
you want to write this particular story?
Well, it's interesting. I wrestling is very much a part of my life, as it was just about everybody who lived in Memphis. You didn't even have to be a fan to know what was going on. I mean, people were going to tell you about it. It would be on the news. It would be in the newspaper. It was just so ingrained in the city. Even if you didn't particularly keep up with it or even care that much about it, you still cared about it in the sense that it was part of the landscape and the culture of the city. So there have been some good uh, there have been some good books on specific aspects of Memphis history, some locally produced books, but no one had done a comprehensive look. And there was so that was a big part of it, what we've been talking about, but also um, I wanted to relive some of the things that I remembered from when I was a kid and a young adult when all of these things were going on. I mean, the feud between Jerry Lawler and Andy Kaufman, for example, which was a highlight of the period in which I was paying attention to this. And I was never all that interested in the matches themselves. It's kind of like you've seen one, you've seen them all. They have a formula to it. If you watch it, you can see the basic outline of what they're doing. I mean, they're making a lot of it up as they go along, but the basic idea is there, and it basically is a formula that's followed over and over and over again. But what was interesting to me were the storylines, or what they called promotions, and those were um, stories that they used to try to get people to go to the matches on Monday nights, to people who would pay to get in. So they wanted to build expectation, build excitement. So, wild things would happen on the Saturday morning TV show that would be concluded on the following Monday night. Like there's an example of in the early 80s where the Russian invader was a wrestler who came to town, and on Saturday morning, they did this show where he's there and he's very belligerent and very anti-American, as you know the Cold War was at that time. And so he has a match scheduled for Jerry against Jerry Lawler on Monday night. So Lawler comes out, and uh, Lawler brings a bag of wheat with him, which at that time we were selling a lot of grain to the Soviet Union. And he says, you know, he said there's a lot of things wrong with this country, but a lot of things that are right. And one of the things is that an idiot from Moscow can come on American television and say what he wants to say, even if it's stupid. And he said, I tell you what I'm going to do on Monday night. I'm going to cram this wheat down your throat. So then some of the Russian invaders' allies attack Lawler, and they throw him in the ring and they open the wheat and they cram it down his throat. And so it ends up, but on Monday night, I'm going to take care of you. And of course, that's exactly what happened. And so people watching that are like, hey, I want to see how this comes out. There's a soap opera element to all this too. and they played it perfectly. They knew the men who Jerry Jarrett and others who created the product knew very well how to tap into people's emotions, how to tap into grievance. One of the things that Andy Kaufman would do, I mean, he was a network TV star at the time, and he would come to Memphis and just insult the city and all the people who lived there. He'd say, "You from Memphis? You plow the field, and you bunch of idiots." And and then he'd say, he'd have these promote videos he'd send in saying, "Let me show. This is a bar of soap. Let me explain to you how this works." And so he just enraged everybody, but it got people talking about it. And even if you didn't go on Monday night, you knew what was going on. I mean, I was a senior in high school when that was going on, and I didn't really watch. At that point, I had sort of stopped watching the Saturday morning show, but because I thought I was too sophisticated for this stuff at 17. But I tuned in to see what Andy Kaufman was going to say and do, and it just went on, and it built and it built and it built, and it led to Kaufman and Jerry Lawler being on the David Letterman show in 1982, and Lawler slapping Kaufman on the air. So those kinds of things. Most territories, if you would watch, like for example, in the early '80s, you started to see cable television takes root, and so Memphians are able to watch all these other wrestling shows. And I can remember one Saturday afternoon coming in, and my brother was watching a show from Atlanta, and there was no wild antics. There was no. It was just one guy saying, "Yeah, I'll see you in the match, and see you in the ring," and all this kind of stuff. And it was not exciting at all. I was like, "This is boring." And so, but it was never boring in Memphis. And so, exploring that, and I thought was a way to understand the city better, but also just to give readers a chance to either relive this or experience it for the first time. Um, and it was the most fun I've ever had writing a book. I started out not entirely sure I was going to write a book. I just started playing around with it, and it didn't take long to where this was just becoming a lot of fun to write, and so I didn't want to stop. And unlike some books, there was no pulling of teeth or anything trying to get it out and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. It just unfolded seamlessly, which is the best writing experience I've ever had.
That's amazing. So obviously you kind of grew up watching and, participating in the sport
Hmm.
um, by watching. Were there any stories that you learned about in your research that you didn't know that were just super interesting?
Oh yeah, I mean, one thing that there was the person who really sort of I mean, there were a lot of people involved and a lot of great wrestlers, but excuse me, the most interesting wrestler, other than Jerry Lawler, who's been the king of Memphis wrestling for 50 years, 56, well, closer to 60 years now, um, was a guy named Sputnik Monroe. And Sputnik Monroe came to Memphis in the late 1950s, and he was, for the most part, he was considered what is called a heel, a bad guy, a villain. And he was interesting looking. He had dark hair, but he had a white streak through his hair. And one of the things that I found were, if you looked at school yearbooks in 1958 and 1959, you saw all these kids who had painted a white streak in their hair so they could be like Sputnik Monroe. But what was most fascinating about him was he was very popular with the African American community, and he played to that. And he personally had a very strong sense of justice, and he didn't like to see people pushed around because he didn't like to be pushed around. And so he The story has always been that he integrated the city's auditorium. There was segregation was still in effect in the 1950s, and African American patrons had to go up to the highest levels of the auditorium. There was a separate entrance and exit, and but there were so many African Americans who wanted to see Sputnik that he was outraged by this. So the story always was that he integrated it, but the question was, how did he do it? And so what he did is one night he went to the guy who was taking the tickets at the door, and his job, in part, was to tell the management how many uh, black attendees there were, so they'd cut it off because they were only going to sell so many, that because they couldn't go out down to the floor where white people were. So Sputnik paid the guy to undercount how many African Americans there were. And so it got to the point to there were more African Americans inside the hall and no seats. And so they were forced to allow them to sit in the on the white floor because they didn't want to lose that money. And ultimately, it came down to money was more important than segregation. And so at that point, they opened up the auditorium for African Americans to sit wherever they wanted to. And so it's fascinating to learn exactly how. When you hear these, it's true with the study of history a lot. You hear, well, this person did this person did that, or this happened. How did it happen? Why did it happen and how did it happen? What are the details, which often gets lost? So I found that story to be fascinating, and there are many, many others, but just learning the background of the story. There was in the late 70s, there was the Memphis territory also included parts of Mississippi and parts of Alabama. And so the wrestlers would go down, would go to Birmingham, would go to Tupelo, Mississippi. And one Saturday night, they were in 79, they were having trouble filling seats. So they needed something dramatic. So what they did is Jerry Lawler and his tag team partner, Bill Dundee, against two opponents. Um, and They were at Tupelo, and after the match, it spilled over into the crowd. Then it spilled over into the lobby, and they ended up in the concession stand. And I remember seeing this on television the following Saturday morning, and it was like the Hindenburg disaster. The way it was, the announcer Lance Russell, he was like, "Hey, uh, Alan, come over here. We got to get this on film. They're beating the hell out of each other." And so they go down, and at one point, the cord to the camera gets stuck, and they're, "Wait a minute, we got to do that." It was all it seemed so spontaneous and everything. And so they get down there, and they are just trashing the concession stand. And back then, condiments like mustard and ketchup were in these big glass bottles. So they're throwing them at each other, and they're busting on the floor, and mustard is flying everywhere. And so discovering that, and they just, it cost them a lot of money to repair it, but it increased attendance the next Monday night after it was shown on television. So, um, and of course I didn't know that it was all sort of planned out. They didn't know how it was going to go down, but that was the plan, was to have this big after the match brawl and film it so that people would get interested. And so learning the details of that, and then hearing from the wrestlers about, well, the reason we did this, and he said, and truth be told, it really got out of hand. They didn't intend they and so the owner of the concession stand, he said, "Listen, you can tear anything up you want except the popcorn machine. Those are hard to find." And so, of course, they busted up the popcorn machine as well as everything else, because at some point it became real in the sense that they're just going to beat the hell out of each other until somebody stops, and Um, so that the behind the scenes stuff is very fascinating.
Absolutely. That's quite a show. Now, in researching the book, did you get to meet any of the wrestlers?
I have met Jerry Lawler a few times, but that's the only one. Most of them are pretty up in years now. A lot of them are already gone. Were already gone when I started, and Jerry Lawler in particular, Bill Dundee, and Jimmy Hart, and these other guys, and including Sputnik Monroe, who's no longer with us. This didn't have anything to do with the book, but I got to meet Sputnik Monroe one time, which was incredible, which I write about in the introduction to the book. Um, but the good thing about it is most of this is pretty well documented. I mean, there are tons of interviews that have already been done. Lawler wrote a book, and he talks about all these things, and so there were plenty of sources. And I've seen Bill Dundee out. I've seen Jimmy Hart. Those are the only three that I can think of that I've actually seen. But and Lawler, I've spoken to a couple of times. Yeah.
Well, I think that is all the questions that I have. Thank you so much
Good.
for chatting with us. This was such a fun book to read and also to chat with you about. Again,
Good.
it's a little bit different from what we normally do here, but
Right.
I think it's still a very fun, interesting history.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much. The book is available online either at arcadiapublishing.com or you can purchase it wherever books are sold.